All right, in this video, we're going to compare the Rmax to the Pioneer. Previously, I was kind of comparing the Rmax to the Commander I rented the day before. Took my new Pioneer out and a brand new Rmax, drove them back to back in Tennessee. And yeah, I'm going to give you my analysis on them. We're going to break this video up into three parts. The first part's going to be a drag race, pretty quick. And the second part's going to be some observations I made while driving the Rmax right after driving my Pioneer. And the third part is going to be going through the spec sheets, and I think that'll shed some light on why there's so many differences. And yeah, it was pretty interesting driving the Rmax. Very different experience going into it after driving a Honda from driving a Can-Am, as you'd expect. But still a great machine. But you know, me and the owner of the Rmax both came out of this thinking the Pioneer was a better buggy in a lot of ways. Primarily because it doesn't have a belt drive. Same thing we always go back to here.
3, 2, 1.
So pretty obvious what happened here. The Pioneer 1000 in high range sport mode got a jump on the Rmax. It even chirped the tires, which is pretty impressive. And then the Rmax sailed past it because it's got more power. But the clutching on the Rmax is not ideal. It's extremely conservative to get you that 10-year belt warranty, but I don't think it's clutched right. I think it needs heavier weights to make it upshift faster. The General actually beat the Rmax pretty good, and the General's got better clutching. That's what it really comes down to. The power is very similar between those two. The Rmax does have some weight in it. It had a pretty big cooler and 10 gallons of gas. And the Pioneer has a good amount of weight in it. 2 big boxes of tools and a cooler and a spare tire. So they're both pretty weighed down. So I think it's a kind of a fair comparison there, and it does kind of show you how cool the transmission in the Pioneer is, that it's a little utility buggy and it can jump on something like an Rmax. So I am now driving a 2022 Rmax. This is a fully loaded one. What the fuck? Feels like something's hanging up. You hear that? So one of the problems we've had with this thing already is the parking brake hangs up a lot. Man, it feels different than the Pioneer. The seats are extremely soft. He's got this windshield in here, glass windshield, so that costs you some visibility, unfortunately. And this roof comes down a lot farther, so the Pioneer feels way more open. I keep waiting for it to shift. It ain't shifting. So I need to figure out what the differences are between this one and the one I had in Moab. This feels less sporty. It feels like it. Oh, that's annoying. Put it in trail mode. Wow. No matter what you do, you're turning around 5,000 RPMs if you're cruising. That's a lot of RPMs, Yamaha. The throttle takes some getting used to. You really got to push the throttle on this thing.
Are you in trail or?
I'm in trail now, yeah, because I put it in sport, it was too jumpy.
Put it in crawl and it's like nothing.
Yeah, I might as well try that out. Crawl mode, here we go. What? I don't know how I made it because you're dragging pretty good. All right, guys, I know I'm going to get called a Honda fanboy for this little portion of the video here, but hear me out. So this is driving me driving an Rmax right after driving my Pioneer and also messing with some Talons. So I have a different takeaway this time than when I rode the Rmax in Moab after just driving a piece of crap Can-Am that was rattling all over the place and falling apart. So still love the Rmax, still think it's one of the best buggies out there, but it does have some very serious issues to take care of right off the bat. The owner of this Rmax and me both came away wanting to drive the Pioneer after doing them back to back because the Pioneer is so much quieter and it doesn't feel lethargic. It doesn't feel like you have to floor it to go anywhere and turn all kinds of RPMs. And that is 100% the transmission. As we expected, the 2022 Pioneer transmission is awesome. Honda's made more and more improvements there, and they've got it tuned down really good, and you have control of your gear ratios. This Rmax was turning 5,000 RPMs all day long at a minimum, and then when you're going cruising on the highway, it's turning 6,500 RPMs. There's 90 decibels in the cab, and you can't even hear yourself think. You really wanted to wear earplugs in it. The glass windshield actually made it louder. Another issue we have with the with the Rmax was stability. There's no rear sway bar on these Rmaxes. There's just a little tiny front one. And we loaded this thing down with 2 big gas cans, a big cooler full of ice and beer, and then the glass windshield, the rear windshield, a couple other accessories like that. It has some serious stability issues. It rocks a lot. You can see it in the video, and on pavement it was quite unsettling. The combination of not having turf mode and just how top heavy it felt meant it could not keep up with the Pioneer on paved mountain roads. That's pretty sad. Pioneer is supposed to be a farm buggy. So that's the issues we had with the Rmax. The Pioneer wasn't perfect. Obviously, the seats aren't as comfortable. Steering wheel's not as comfortable. There's no padding everywhere. The Rmax fit and finish in the cab is great. But is it really worth losing the excellent transmission you get in a Talon or Pioneer? Absolutely not. But the Pioneer had one major issue. It is so quiet that any rattle is very obvious. So the bed had a good bit of rattling. I solved that by taking the bed latch mechanism off and just putting a ratchet strap over the bed. You'll notice that in the videos. And then that totally fixed the rattle, and the Pioneer was silent. It uses a similar bed latch to the Rmax and even the General we were out there with. But again, the General and the Rmax have belt noise to hide the noise of the bed rattling. So you don't really notice it as much. But yeah, if I had to pick one or the other for most situations, I'd definitely pick the Pioneer. I'm not just saying that because I bought it. As you guys know, I love talking shit about the stuff I buy. The Rmax could be greatly improved with some clutch work. Unfortunately, to do that clutch work, you got to tear the entire body apart because you can't get to the belt drive from the bottom or the side. The engine's right in the center of the buggy, and the skid plates don't come off. They're welded to the frame, which I think is really stupid for maintenance and repairs. So you have to pull the entire interior out to do anything. That's another thing the Pioneer wins on, is you can just pop the seat and get to a lot of the engine, or you can put it on a lift and drop your skid plates or lay on the ground or whatever. So yeah, I'm glad I got the Pioneer. It's fun to test them back to back, but I don't think the Rmax is quite there yet. We'll show you what I'm talking about a little bit more in the specs. All right, guys, so here's my spec sheet. I love spec sheets, and then I know no one ever watches this part, but I'm going to go through it in great detail and great length to make sure I'm very thorough, and everyone who complains about me being biased towards Honda, I can tell them to watch the video in its entirety, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so first of all, comparing an Rmax to a Pioneer, kind of stupid. They're for very different things, which is what I'm going to prove here with this chart. But also, I was very interested in both of them, so I think a lot of other people might be interested in both of them. So this will help you determine, which one's more suitable for your needs. As one of my favorite YouTubers always says, there's better does not exist. It's only what is more suitable for a given list of needs. Okay, anyways, so MSRP, Rmax P1000. This delta is just subtracting this column from this column, and this is the percentage difference. The Rmax 2 base model is $7,380 more expensive than a Pioneer 1003. That is a huge chunk of change. It's 41% more expensive. This is MSRP plus delivery. This kind of takes out the dealership charging you more for this, that, or the other thing. The Rmax is expensive. It better be damn good to be worth that much extra money. All right? Also, I'm going to say there. The weight, the Rmax is 250 pounds heavier. That doesn't sound like that much, but it's almost 16%. Suspension travel, Rmax has way more suspension travel than the Honda. By the way, the highlighted things in red are things the Pioneer wins. So I just did that for my purposes, but yeah. So 34% more travel in the front and 69% more travel in the rear, because the Rmax has a crazy amount of rear travel. I think it's actually kind of overkill having driven one all weekend. It does help when you're stuck in a rut. The rear wheels can drop down real far. Horsepower, Rmax has 108. We don't really know what the Honda has. I guessed about 80 based on the old 2021 power specs, but no one's really dynoed a 2022. So I guessed 80, and that feels about right. So the Rmax has more power, no surprise there. Width, pretty similar in width, pretty similar in length. However, wheelbase is pretty different. 7 inches difference in wheelbase. That makes the Rmax, more stable at high speed as far as bucking front to rear, but it gives the Pioneer 1000 a lot more maneuverability. Turning radius, as you can see here, about 20 feet to about 14 feet, so 44% difference. The Pioneer turns on a dime. And you also got to remember that the Pioneer has an open rear differential in turf mode, so that even helps more. Bed payload. The Pioneer can handle almost twice as much weight in the bed. And that's because it has a rear sway bar Yamaha that you forgot to put on the Rmax. So that's a 400-pound difference. Ground clearance, they're very close, especially considering that one's on 30s and one's on 27s. So that's pretty interesting. Fuel capacity, the Rmax has a lot more fuel capacity, 1.3 gallons more, but it's not as efficient because it has a belt drive that's clutch very conservative and turns 5,000, 6,000 RPMs all the time. So in practice, we found that the Pioneer actually had slightly better range. Bed area, so this is like a multiplier of the width of the bed times the length of the bed at its average biggest point. You'll see exactly how I did it following this video. But the bed on the Pioneer is significantly larger than the Rmax. The Pioneer has an extra seat, obviously, tire size, we already talked about that. This is some more subjective stuff right here. So gear ratio control, I guess this is not subjective. The Rmax's gear ratio is controlled by RPM and load via the primary and secondary clutch on the belt. Whereas in the Pioneer, you have a computer that looks at a bunch more inputs than that to choose a shift point. And you also have yourself. You can put it in manual mode and use the paddle shifter, so it definitely wins that. Rear diff, the Pioneer has a rear diff, the turf mode. The Rmax does not, so it wins that. Parking brake, the Rmax has a hand brake. The Pioneer just has a brake park in the sub-transmission. I think the Pioneer's better because the handbrake on this Rmax was already messing up at 100 miles, and my 850 Wolverine had the same problem. It constantly requires adjustment and squeaking, and it's hard to get to. Brake size, the Rmax has a lot bigger brakes. They're about 250 millimeters average front to rear, whereas the Pioneer is only 210. Towing, the Pioneer can tow 500 pounds more than the Rmax because it doesn't have a stupid belt drive, and it has a rear sway bar. Standard roof, you don't get a roof on the Pioneer. Body fit and finish, Rmax is bar none the best fit and finish on the bodywork, stuff like that. The Pioneer is pretty terrible, so I gave it a 1 versus a 10. The tie rods, the Rmax's tie rods are junk in the front. We didn't bend them up in Royal Blue, luckily, but we very easily could have, whereas the Pioneer gets some upgraded tie rods for 2022. Power steering, having driven both back to back, the power steering is a lot more powerful in the Pioneer. It feels a lot more agile. The Rmax's is very good, but with the stickier, fatter carnivores that came on this XTR, especially when you lock the front diff, there's a lot of effort in the steering, which isn't a big deal to me at all. I just figured I'd put it on here. Storage, the Pioneer has tons of storage under the seat, big glove box, cubbies everywhere, bed's bigger, there's storage under the hood. It really smokes the Rmax as far as storage. Fly-by-wire throttle, the Rmax has it, the Pioneer doesn't. I don't like fly-by-wire throttle that much, so this is kind of not really a good or bad, but I kind of prefer the simplicity of the Honda's throttle cable. And seat comfort, the Rmax has some of the most comfortable seats in any side-by-side, and the Pioneer has a bench seat, so that's obviously a big difference there. So you can see that these specs are wildly different in a lot of different ways. The Pioneer is geared towards being a cheap farm machine that can do some sport utility stuff as needed. It has power for that, has some decent suspension, but you're not going to take it down a trail 50 miles an hour like you will with an Rmax. That being said, is that difference worth $7,400? Well, that depends how much $7,400 is to you. To me, it's not. I don't have that much money. So I would go with the Pioneer just based off the price alone and the fact that, the Pioneer's almost as fast. And I'm going to find a way to upgrade the suspension on my Pioneer to Rmax suspension, and then it's going to be, once I do that, it'll blow the Rmax out of the water in almost every single one of these areas. So there's the specs and my opinions on them. And yeah, hope you guys found this video helpful if you're looking to pick between an Rmax or a Pioneer. All right, we're going to take some measurements of the bed. Bed opening is just an inch over 4 feet, 49 inches. And then bed max, it's 54 inches. So that's pretty good. It's 54 by 39. That's a serious bed. Let's compare that to the Rmax. The bed opening
it's about 50, and it's only 29.5 inches deep. And the opening is 40 inches. Interesting.
Yeah, what a big.
These things look big.
Yeah, they look big.
So these are 34 Moto EFX somethings. And they say they're 34s, and boy, they measure 33 3/4 with the weight of the machine on them.